I'll hang up now. Good morning, everyone. Can I test if my slides work?
Yes, you can. Yes. Hi, Douglas. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Good morning, Dr. Ahmed. Pleasure to meet you.
Sure. We will. You want to test the PowerPoint you have?
Yeah, just it's.
Okay.
I usually get a colleague to do this for me because I'm. It always goes wrong. Always goes wrong. So let me share screen.
Lorna, can you give the share to Douglas, then get it back after? Here we go.
Can you see this?
Now, indeed. Indeed, yes. Indeed, doctor, yes.
All right, right. You can see my slides then.
Yes, yes.
Right, okay, I'll stop sharing then.
No problem.
When I need
you stop the sharing now.
Yeah.
Here we go.
I should say I've never reached the level to be so esteemed as to have a PhD. I'm just a plain mister.
No, you are. We learn from you. You know, Douglas. You are an expert in the field, and
thank you. It's very kind.
And you did a great job for years, and this is why today people all over the world registered. They want to hear from you about QA and the best practices. Douglas, if you allow me, we have also with us our Professor David Smith from United States. Okay, he will address us first. Okay, then it will be you second. Okay, David also, he's an expert in the accreditation and quality and learning assessment, and also we learn from him a lot. Hopefully, we hope to see you in Saudi soon.
Yeah, well, this year would have been the year. And David, I don't know if you go to the CHIA conference. I would normally be packing my bags to head to Washington next week to join Judith Eaton and all the US accreditors for the big conference there. But I'm speaking at it, but it's all online. It's a shame.
Yes, I have been in the past. Normally, for the last few years, I've been focused specifically on AACSB because our institution is going through that. So I've had to have more of a presence with them than at CHIA. But no, I've been to the CHIA annual meeting several times in the last 10 years. So yeah, I'm more, like I said, my teaching and institution focus is more business as opposed to general quality assurance. I've just evolved into this role over the last 15 or 20 years because I don't think anybody else wanted to do it. So, but no, I look forward to your slideshow. I think we'll probably have a lot of overlap, and that's fine. I had part of a PowerPoint together, and I decided I just would hold off and talk because I think the true value is going to come from the questions. Who's the specific institutional questions. So. Yeah, I'll give my perspective on the U.S. Obviously, it's going to be a little different than the KSA in terms of money, resources, availability, and some of the consolidation of universities because there are universities going out of business in the U.S. So a little bit different scenario, but still concerning. So I'll address a little bit of that and certainly talk about the course level information as well. So no, I look forward, Douglas, to seeing your slides.
I've just changed my slide background. Does it work?
Yeah, I like it.
Oh, good.
We're just gonna go to sleep after that.
Well, maybe I'll go daytime.
All right. We have 1 minute left. It's less than 50 seconds, then we'll be in the air.
I'll throw the surprise picture in. There's my family.
Oh, that's nice. Oh.
It was sunny that Christmas.
Douglas, where are you?
In Gloucester.
Okay.
So we're about 1 hour 30 minutes by fast train to London, maybe 120 miles west of London.
Okay.
And it's very, very, we've got a storm here. It's very windy, very wet.
Okay.
So you might hear the background noise of the wind.
Okay.
And you're in, was it Florida you're in?
Yes, South Florida. So yeah, between West Palm Beach and Fort Lauderdale, the home of Donald Trump, who's coming into town today. So all the streets are barricaded. So they want to make sure he gets home before people go crazy. So yeah, it'll be interesting.
My parents, my father and my stepmother live in Florida and near Kissimmee, but they used to be in the villages, which was quite lively during the election.
Yes, it was. It was. I drive through there all the time, so I know exactly where you're talking about.
If you allow me, Professor David Smith and Professor Douglas will be in there in the now.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for registering with us and attending the webinar, chat and talk, in a title of Assessment and Learning Outcomes during COVID-19. I would like to have brief information first before we start to hear from our panelists about the Imam Abdurrahman bin Faisal. First of all, my name is Dr. Ahmed Al-Kuwaiti. I am the Supervisor General of the Deanship of Quality and Academic Accreditation at Imam Abdurrahman bin Faisal. For the people knows where is the Imam Abdurrahman bin Faisal University from our friend globally. It's in the east part in Saudi Arabia. Today, under the auspices of His Excellency, Professor Abdullah Rubaysh, the president of Imam Abdurrahman bin Faisal University, is proud to announce our webinar series for the enhancement of equality skills. Imam Abdurrahman bin Faisal as a university, we have a milestone, as a matter of fact, to introduce the university with more than 37,000 students and more than 4,000 faculty. A university established in 1975 and keep going, developing her strategic planning and to go to different stages within the University of Higher Education in Saudi Arabia. In 2009, to become a university decree established with the name University of Dammam, in that time as independent university. And in 2014, from the University of Dammam, we established another university called Hafr al-Batin. In 2015, we earned the first accreditation locally by the National Academic and Accreditation in Saudi Arabia, which is the recognized body for accrediting the programs, the institutes and programs. And also from that time up to now, we have more than 20 programs accredited by NCAA and by EBIT in United States for engineering, and by different and by NAB for architecture, and other recognized bodies. And we are a member in Shia and a member in different recognized bodies in accreditation. This is just give us where we are in this. I mean, we are going to have the more accredited program to enhance the quality skills and the quality culture within the university. As a matter of fact, Imam Abdurrahman bin Faisal University is the 5-star ranked by QS within the teaching and learning, and also is the 5 top schools within Saudi University, and the top 40s with Arab countries, and the top 500 with the global wise within the QS, and also has advanced level of accredited by Times and by other ranking agency as US or global green metrics. just overview where we are in this. We have almost 20 colleges with 96 programs, with almost 37 students and 4,000 faculty. We have a huge program with masters and PhD, and almost our graduates average 7,000 yearly. Next. And this webinar, this invitation for our panelists, it comes from initiative idea. We call it Jusur, and for our colleague, Jusur means link in Arabic. Jusur means link, and we are linking the knowledge and linking information and linking the education to all our colleagues internationally. Okay, and we are developed this Jusur to be a monthly Zoom meeting using the power of the online learning to communicate our friends all over the world to spread the knowledge. It's a free invitation. The reason behind it is enhancing the learning outcomes, especially when it comes in COVID, and we are planning to have it after COVID. Next, please. Today, we're gonna focus our panelists, well-known category. As a matter of fact, Professor David Smith and Mr. Douglas Blackstock. And Professor David Smith, he will share with us the objectives of the topic of today, which is sharing the practices that have been learned from the pandemic, what worked well, and what may be more challenging or problematic. And also we will to consider what a future arrangement might be. And I think Professor Smith and Professor Dr. Blackstock, he will really give us the tips what we need, as a matter of fact. And hopefully this pandemic will be over soon, but in case of will be longer, and how the people to be prepared for it for the remaining of the time. We are still in the pandemic all over the world, and still we are working digitally as well. Let's see how our panelists address it. What I want to say about it, all of us, we know in higher education, modules have a specific learning outcome, providing information and learning level, which a student need to achieve targeted educational objective. To assess the objective directly associated with the achievement of the learning outcome, both by supporting the learning process and evaluating the degree of learning. And I think this is what we are on with, when I introduce the learning outcome and assessment. In a pre-COVID-19 situation, universities globally use formative and summative assessment to monitor student learning or meeting learning objective. However, COVID-19 pandemic pushed them to big deal to restructure assessment and conduct remotely, what we call it online assessment. And such as remote assessment include proctored exam series of quizzes, open book, take home, exam presentation, demonstration. Remote assessment during the COVID is being challenging when it's intended to assess a student performance over the learning outcome and to promote learning activities. The key issue in the remote assessment include academic dishonesty, infrastructure, coverage of learning outcome, and the student commitment to submit assessment. Today, I think we need to hear from our panelists and discuss with them. And I really also welcome your Q&A, your question, because I think it's the time we can interact with our panelists to give us their experience in this. Our panelists, again, they will share their practices, have been learned from pandemic, share those practices that worked well as those identified as more challenging. Talking higher education considers the required future arrangement toward the larger scale shift to digital delivery and assessment. I would like to meet our panelists. It's my really pleasure to introduce my friend and our chief, which is, I call him our chief because he's the QA chief executive sense, and definitely Douglas, he will speak to us about QA in UK and what the role of play in that. And he is, since 2015, he's the CEO for QA, which is QA play a big role for enhancing the quality. His work included leading the transformation of QA and leading its contribution to change to the policy, regulatory, and the quality landscape across United Kingdom, and the QA role in supporting higher education adapt to challenge brought by COVID-19 pandemic. Douglas joined QA in 2002 as a director of administration, and has subsequently held the role of director resource and chief of operating officer. He became QA company secretary from 2002 to 2016, led the QA work and student engagement for a number of years, was a member of NUS and UK, led the student charter group. He is a board member of the European Association for Quality Assurance in Higher Education, and graduate in public administration from what is now Glasgow Caledonian University. While we have our professor David Smith, he's well known, as a matter of fact, from Florida, professor of management and marketing at Palm Beach Atlantic University, and a former management consultant with Arthur Andersen. He has worked with the Department of Commerce, Small Business Administration, Foreign Agriculture Service, Export Development Cooperation, and numerous economic trade development group. Included in his consultation experience, he has worked with numerous Future 500 firms of seeking marketing expansion, export capital acquisition, and enhance global operation and logistics. Professor Smith has over 30 years of international experience. He has forged valuable contacts throughout the world, often speaking at national and international conferences on topic of strategic management, marketing, and international business. As a seasoned accreditor, David Smith has served as a review panel member for 6 different accredited bodies. He has a huge experience in that. He is still with us with the NCAA, and also AACSB for business, IACPE, and SACS, and NWCCU, and also AASC. Finally, he's also noted a researcher with over 60 completed industry research projects, academic peer-reviewed publication, presentation, and books. We'll always learn from our panelists. They are our mentor. They are our people, our academician. They have the expert chat and talk. They really want you as an audience interacting with you. It's my honor and my privilege to introduce my friend, Professor David Smith. He will address us with the objective of the webinar. Professor David, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. I appreciate the opportunity. Good afternoon in Saudi Arabia. Good morning from Florida. So we are bright and early here. I'm very excited about today's discussion. When Dr. Ahmed asked me to speak, it brought to mind things that we are doing currently at our institution. So most of my perspective to you today will be regarding U.S. practices, although some are, as you mentioned in your introduction, applicable to all universities around the world. I think from an overall perspective, I would first just like to look at the higher education burden from COVID, at 3 different levels. You have institutional policies, guidelines, assessments, dealing with resources and students from a top-down look, which really impacts resource availability, primarily in institutions where they are tuition driven. With over 4,000 universities in the United States, there are numerous of those universities which are struggling financially due to the fact that there has been a decline in student enrollment. And with that decline, resources have become scarce. Now, as a professor, maybe, and again, I'm sure you're in many roles out there in the audience, we might think that that's not a big deal, but when resources become scarce at the top level, they become extremely scarce at the program and course level. So with that, certain practices, certain supplies that may have been available at one time have been severely impacted. I don't really want to talk too much about that today, but it is important to understand that the finite aspect of resources in the universities in the United States has severely diminished over the last 18 months, specifically as the build up to COVID and during 2020 for sure. At the program level, there are really two distinct types of programs in universities. You have resource-based or heavy resource-based programs such as nursing, pharmacy, medicine, dentistry, the sciences. And then you have less resource intense business, humanities, law, those types of programs, which are more faculty driven or require less resources from the university. Those particular programs have taken the burden of what were once cash cows to become extremely important to these universities, because the resources for the heavier based ones have again become more limited. Our budget, as a matter of fact, was reduced by about 18%. Most of that resource was hard resources. However, some of that was faculty. So in saying that, we don't run the university from the bottom up, but we need to be wary of what's happening at the top in terms of retention and enrollment to understand why certain decisions are being made at the program and course level. So one of my perspectives to you this morning is more as a professor than as a quality assurance individual, although I have done 6 or 7 reviews for NCAA and understand the Saudi environment very well. Most of the burden of what we've seen in 2020 has come at the course level. Faculty have had to retool to become able or willing to deliver in a mechanism that is different than what they are used to. We have been very careful at our institution to watch the terminology we use in terms of whether we are delivering online, whether we are delivering on ground, or whether we are delivering in what we call a high flex mode. High flex was designed at our university, and I know other universities are using it, to ensure that the long-term on-ground focus of our university stays intact. To say you are online suggests a different learning modality altogether as compared to a traditional on-ground delivery. HighFlex has tried to separate itself from the online perspective in that you are delivering live online courses with an online audience. So this would be a synchronous, I got that one right, I always get those two confused, where you have live feedback and interaction of attendance via distance or online modality as compared to a traditional, if I can say that now, online delivery where you are standalone. The method for learning for online students is distinctly different than that from on ground. I think the statistics and evidence are clear with that. So The HighFlex, one of the goals of the HighFlex delivery is to, again, try to ensure or maintain, number one, more than quality assurance, that the student feels like they are on ground and will be returning to an on-ground environment as soon as the pandemic is under control, a vaccine, which may be 5 semesters from now, 3 semesters. Our institution would suffer greatly financially if 3/4 of our students decided that they weren't going to come back to the on-ground environment. Other universities' missions are different. And when we look at accreditation, the mission statement at the program level is extremely important to drive what are these assessment tools that we're going to look at the course level. Now, at the course level, we mentioned things like academic dishonesty. We talked about integrity of measures and things like that. For the most part, in non-resource-based assessment outcomes, there hasn't been a lot of change at our institution in terms of having to jump into these 6 or 8 program level objectives and change them dramatically, because the measure has typically been exam outcomes, project outcomes, presentation outcomes, interaction with corporations. They've been very distinct to activity that occurs outside of assessments, such as lab assessments, or working with biologics in the sciences. So the type of learning is different, and that has to be clearly recognized. Even within the university, there may be multiple types of assessment measures that need to be in place based on the type of program that we have. So in terms of external validity and looking at what we can do for assessment there, and this would be talking about the student who is HighFlexing in, or what we call, I guess the new word in the dictionary would be zooming in. So since we have students zooming in a live feed, we have to measure their performances on those outcomes that are outside of our control, such as exams. So how do we control for exams? I believe, again, these standard practices have been established. Things like having a learning management system with modules in place to allow for certain types of control and communication. So for example, we use Canvas. Many of my colleagues use Blackboard and those types of platforms. If your organization has been doing this for a while, you're pretty familiar with this. If your organization is behind, it's most likely that they are scrambling in their technology departments to get up and running with platforms where the faculty are comfortable. So for exams, it's fairly simple. You have mechanisms in place to monitor, physically watch the individual take exams. The question would be more like not whether or not they are being dishonest, but whether or not they are actually retaining the information in the online Zoom delivery as opposed to being in the classroom. For example, the faculty member can't look in the eyes as easily of the zooming in or HighFlex students as they can, let's say, for example, the students in the classroom. So it becomes more difficult for the professor to gauge or engage the students when they are online. One of the changes we just made this semester, we had a lot of, we did some statistics and found that the online, again, not traditional, our HighFlex version, the live online students did not perform as well in the classes. The GPAs were lower across the board, across the disciplines. And one of the things that we found in terms of why this may be occurring, we found that about 85% of students who zoomed in did not zoom in video. They only zoomed in audio. So the professor could see their black square like we're seeing today, but they couldn't see their face, couldn't see their eyes, couldn't see what they were doing like you would if you were in the classroom. So this semester, we have decided that we will require that all students who are online, for example, be videoed in so that you can see the individual students. I know that sounds relatively minor. I think a lot of the major items have been hit, but it's become very important as to engaging. Now, we've only been doing this for a couple of weeks, but I know I have about 20% of my classes which I am teaching to via Zoom, and I found it to be a great help, just that small change. So this led us to the discussion of how do we get feedback from faculty to synthesize their experiences in the classroom with their students to learn from what may be working and what may not be working. So we created a forum, which is overseen by the technology department, where faculty come in and they will provide their best practices. And then the senior administration, the provost, and a committee that was formed by them will look at these best practices, and if working well, we'll implement them either in the school itself or possibly across the university. Obviously, there are external testing programs as well. There are third-party bodies where students can take tests, but I don't think it's about tests. I think if a student is going to be academically dishonest online, he's going to be academically dishonest in the classroom, or certainly try to be. So it's not that we're seeing a paradigm shift in any of these items. It's more, how do we control or measure what we are looking at in terms of the KPI and the course learning objectives. So the modification for course learning objectives is more directly related to the measure itself than the outcome. So if, for example, it is an end of course project, that let's say that's your measure, there's really no change in the assessment there other than the continuity of checking for plagiarism, which you should be doing anyway at in an on-ground scenario as well. So with that, we haven't seen a lot of changes in the business area. I suspect from my colleagues across the university in programs like pharmacy, they are struggling more because there has to be more demonstration of understanding and competence in front of the faculty member as opposed to just taking an exam. So for an example, they are doing more hands-on evaluation items, variables, where they need to have that more direct component. It's much more difficult to do that online than, let's say, in business. We've also adjusted our presentation requirements. Certain courses have part of their assessments, their learning outcomes, based on, let's say, a presentation. If it's a team presentation. Again, this has not been too much of a problem in terms of implementing the individual online, if possibly they are teamed with an individual on ground. We have gotten away from having groups, for example, that are all online. So any online individual in a group environment is connected with an on-ground student. Now, again, this is the high flex delivery as opposed to the true online delivery. I didn't really look to focus on that today because I believe the majority of standards for pure online learning have not changed much during COVID. So in 2020, our online programs didn't change really at all because they were established for the pure online learner. This is for the student who can't make it to class at a particular period of time. Not so much related to course outcomes, but some other practices we are doing in terms of comforting or making the on-ground student a little more comfortable. We provide an open dormitory, so if anyone is found to be positive with the virus, they are immediately isolated to a dorm specifically designated for COVID positive patients. We also have mandatory seating charts that are supplied to the health department. So anyone sitting within a radius of the student is also notified and tested as well. So they may or may not be quarantined based on the physical proximity in the class. Obviously, we're using plastic shielding and masks. So all those are typically the same. Also, too, we decided early on to make one department in the university responsible for the decision of whether or not the student could choose to Zoom in or HyFlex in, taking the burden off of the professor to determine whether or not a student had a legitimate reason not to attend class. So any student who is in the online delivery in terms of the HyFlex is required to get clearance from a particular individual who is a health individual to say, look, I can't come for this semester because I have elderly parents who I care for. I have to travel internationally, which requires quarantine. I have a health issue myself. So these individuals are screened ahead of time, and then each professor is notified of these individuals. One of the issues that occurred in the fall semester was we had students that were jumping in and out of the online delivery. So it's like, I don't really want to come today. I'm just going to hop on. And that created problems for the faculty member as well. Are you an on-ground or are you a HyFlex student? So it was difficult to manage. So this came out of the best practices forum, whereby if they are cleared to be off, they are off. If they are not cleared, they have to be in class like a traditional student. So we've tried very hard to focus our long game, our long-term objectives, to getting the students back onto the university grounds and in the classes physically as soon as possible and as comfortable as possible for the parents. Not all universities are doing that. Some are changing to say, hey, this is a capacity potential in terms of a positive. If my classroom seats 30 and I can bring in another 15 via HyFlex, I can increase my capacity from 30 seats to 45 seats, for example. So there's been some excitement as to whether or not this HyFlex delivery will stay in the university even after COVID has been brought under control. So there's some interesting dynamics. Again, I don't see any real change in the volume of online delivery as much as I do this kind of HyFlex or hybrid delivery, where the student feels more engaged in the university, learning objectives from an on-ground perspective as in terms of an online perspective. So there are some real possibilities there. I know I didn't give you a ton of clues. I'm waiting for some of the questions as far as best practices, but I think as it trickles down from the senior administration to the course levels, we're going to be making changes. So I think maybe more than anything, our programs and courses need to be adaptive in terms of being able to change very quickly. I'm sure we all know university faculty that don't like change. So it's possible that you may see some pushback or resistance from this in terms of faculty that are not comfortable with the technology. But anyway, I'll start us off with that. I know Douglas is going to give us a little bit more meat in terms of some techniques to use, but I look forward to your questions as we move forward. Hopefully that was helpful for you. And again, I look forward to your questions in a bit. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor David Smith. Professor David Smith, he talks about the US practice and assessment, and it is applicable to all the universities in the world. He mentioned the top-down look is essential. Look at what happened at the top and come down to the course level. Professor David Smith mentioned two types of progress: resource-based and the heavy resource-based program, which are more faculty-driven. He mentioned the mechanism. What we used before COVID-19 is different now. Online has different. He mentioned the mission statement is important to delivering to derive learning outcome program. And he mentioned also the external validity of the assessment is essential. Many thanks, Professor David Smith. I think we will have a lot of a question from our audience, no doubt, with this generous talk. Let's hear from our second panelist, Mr. Douglas. Are you ready for? Yeah, Douglas, can you hear us? Yes, here we go.
Sorry, I just need to unmute and find my PowerPoint.
There we go. The floor is yours, Douglas.
Do you have it on the screen?
Yes, yes, indeed.
I'm just trying to make sure I'm sharing the from beginning.
Here we go.
Right, okay. Well, good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity, Dr. Ahmed, to present at this seminar and to meet virtually so many colleagues from the Saudi and other systems. It's a tremendous pleasure to be here, and thank you to the university for organising the JUSR series. I think if QA can cooperate, we will as much as we possibly can. What I should say is that we have long-standing relationships with colleagues in Saudi Arabia. We have done much work with NCAA over the years. Sorry, my slides are moving forward. My mouse isn't quite working for me. We've delivered training with NCAA, and I've recently had some meetings with Dr. Sahal Bajmal, and we're looking forward to working with colleagues as you develop. And indeed, I was incredibly grateful to a few years ago to be invited to the embassy in London for Saudi National Day and enjoyed the traditional celebrations. But of course, we are here to talk about this pandemic and how higher education and quality assurance is adapting and alongside institutions. For those who do not know who QA is, we are the independent, not-for-profit higher education quality agency in the UK. We are the only body recognised to assess the standards and quality of UK universities, and we are trusted by governments in all of the 4 countries of the UK, working in partnership with funders and regulators. The UK has a system where higher education policy is devolved. So in each of the 4 UK nations, we have a different and distinct approach to assessment of quality, but our role is to support each in a coherent national UK-wide framework, and QA maintains that. We also work internationally to help address shared challenges to quality and standards and build partnerships. I hope that we will sign an MOU with colleagues in ETEC in Saudi Arabia soon. And it's within that context that we've been working to support our sector through all of the pandemic, working collaboratively to produce guidance for our members, as well as the wider higher education community. In the UK and around the world, the initial emergency response from the sector to the pandemic was an extraordinary effort. Not only a transition to mass delivery through digital means that was rapid and effective, but look at the contribution of our universities, our staff and our students in the public health response, whether it's testing and tracing, or indeed the role of academic staff in developing the vaccines that are giving us so much hope. In educational terms, it has accelerated change, brought forward strategic plans, and instigated new ways of working. Universities and colleges have showed that, contrary to stereotype, they're able to move quickly, decisively, and importantly, collaboratively. In the UK, most providers had emergency planning and groups in place by mid-March to assess the risks posed by COVID-19 and to chart a path forward. The majority engaged their students and staff in planning and design and ensured that communication with staff and students was clear and constructive. There was a real sector interest in maintaining quality and standards and in working together to do so. We saw this in QAA's initial work. From March onwards, QAA produced public guidance, over 30 briefings and resources, along with webinars and advice for the sector to use. I've got several colleagues on the call, by the way, and they will post relevant documents in the chat link for colleagues that want to access that free material. The key thing about our resources and guidance, they were developed with and by the higher education community, including student bodies, regulators, funders, academic staff, institutional leaders. And the involvement of large numbers of staff from our universities helped identify emerging practice at an early stage, and that has been disseminated widely. Over 2,000 people attended our seminars from 276 different organisations, all delivered virtually. And because that practice reflected what the sector was doing in our guidance, it has provided confidence to ministers and governments across the UK. And I personally have met with ministers in England, Wales and Scotland and government representatives, and each have been reassured by the level of higher education's commitment to securing academic standards and the best possible learning experience in the most challenging of circumstances. There were some real challenges for the sector which are covered in the topic for today. The success of providers in transitioning initially online largely depended on their starting position. Those who had already been developing online learning programs, such as the Open University for many, many years, or which had a higher staff and student digital literacy, found the transition easier than others. There were wide differences between types of institutions too, with small and specialist providers often equipped with greater flexibility to handle broad issues, but fewer resources for particular granular ones, Given this variation, it was critically important that providers work together, sharing positive pedagogical practice and maintaining an overall flexibility of approach. I'm coughing now, I hope I don't have COVID. We began to see a strong level of cooperation and flexibility, and maintaining this, I think, remains important to a sector-wide response to the ongoing restrictions today. If colleagues aren't aware, in the UK, we are now in lockdown 3. It's not a sequel that any of us wanted to be watching or participating in. In terms of assessment and learning outcomes, there were a number of shared challenges in this early period, many of which I know other countries have shared. Excuse me, I seem to have something stuck in my throat. There were practical challenges of having to move assessments online and the training and infrastructure needs which this presented. It was also the challenge of reasonable adjustments. Different students, and Professor Smith mentioned this, different students are affected in different ways. Student internet access was not consistent. Some students have caring responsibilities or fell ill themselves and had to isolate. Flexibility from providers was essential to ensure all students could access their assessments. Many institutions expressed concern about digital poverty or digital disadvantage amongst their students, including actually in some cases in staff who lived in remote areas and did not have good internet access. And geographical disparities in internet access in areas of deprivation and rural areas. Access for students with disabilities was and remains crucial. It is easy for emergency adjustments to inadvertently create new barriers to those who already have disadvantage. Some providers offer different kinds of assessment to meet the same learning outcomes. And I've put a couple of examples here from the University of Exeter in the southwest of England, and Heriot-Watt University, who operates in Edinburgh, in Scotland, but also in Dubai, in the UAE, and in Malaysia. And what I should say is, if it is okay, Dr. Ahmed, we shall say that if we can mail these slides to colleagues so that you can have these examples and use use
Sure.
them as you see fit.
Pleasure, no problem at all. Sure.
That's great, and I think it's really important.
Yeah.
An example was offering assessments over a 48-hour window to allow for students' local circumstances. We had students, UK registered students, who'd gone home to Singapore or to Malaysia or to Hong Kong, who couldn't come back to the UK. And for them to sit examinations in UK time, which was the middle of the night their time, was unfair. And so colleagues were flexible. We emphasised as QA throughout that any assessment changes needed to be approved by appropriate bodies and communicated clearly to students. We think this was generally followed, with providers mapping changes against the learning outcomes, and that's what's really important, the learning outcomes. Some providers offered laptops and hardship loans for students, although this varied. Others asked students to complete a local circumstances form or a survey so they could express the constraints they were learning under and how these could be taken into account in mitigation. If learning outcomes could not be achieved, we saw providers making emergency minor amendments, for example, to enable students to progress and achieve the missing learning outcomes at a later date. In the UK, we are talking a lot, in schools in particular, about learning loss, the period that's been lost to these students and the long-term impact on their careers. Indeed, we are very worried about those young people in schools and their readiness for higher education when they complete their school experience. One challenge that we experienced was a significant demands for students for a no detriment or safety net model in which students could not be unfairly disadvantaged by changes. After all, the pandemic is not the fault of the students or the staff or the universities. In most cases, this meant that offering students the most favourable outcome between the result they achieved with changes and the calculated result if these changes had not been introduced. In practice, for many institutions, this meant students were not guaranteed a final grade no lower than their average academic performance prior to the pandemic. This presented a challenge for academic standards, and so it was important to ensure that awarding bodies, universities, were making calculations and decisions that were fair, valid, and reliable. QAA is essentially an international organisation, although our priority, of course, will always be the UK. And part of this seminar today, and many others I've spoken at, has also been to listen and to hear and to understand how others have adapted. And we learned a large amount from colleagues all around the world. We have close relationships and strategic links with many international agencies. I mentioned including ETEC, and we'll get that memorandum across the line, and the NCAA in Saudi Arabia, but also in the region with the CAA, in UAE, KHDA, and many others. And when we're faced with a global challenge like the COVID-19 pandemic, these partnerships are so important. It's essential to share experiences and learn from each other in forums like this. And of course, many Saudi students come to the UK to study, and you want to have confidence that they are getting the best possible experience, even in these challenging circumstances. One of the things we did in responding to the pandemic is we convened an international partners forum where we met to share experiences of organisations' responses to COVID-19. And whilst there was 50 attendees, it was from 20 different countries. So we were able to establish international examples of practice in April, which fed directly into providers' responses here in the UK. And we also have on our website examples from, I think, at least 10 different countries of what institutions are doing. Our forum highlighted sector inconsistency, real variation in universities' readiness, capacity, expertise, and population connectivity. Indeed, our colleagues from Nigeria were saying that some of the biggest challenges students there had was simply getting access to electricity. What if you're a student in a home where there's also school kids and there's one laptop and you've all got to do online learning? It was creating low progression and completion rates, and colleagues were very worried about high attrition rates of students from their programmes. Indeed, I think it's really important, and I hope to pick this up later. Professor David Smith's points earlier. We've been very worried about the progress of students, graduates into the professions, particularly the health professions, when health services are so under pressure at the moment. Some of the initial main challenges to emerge included logistical challenge of moving online, but how to maintain learning outcomes, the best methods for assessment, and how to ensure accessibility for a diverse student population and improve the student experience. One of the case studies we shared was with the University of Calgary in Canada, who developed resources on academic integrity. David mentioned cheating earlier. We have seen an increase in the activity of so-called essay mills, preying on students' fears, trying to encourage them to cheat, to exploit them during the pandemic. These people write someone's essays for a fee. The University of Calgary developed resources to promote academic integrity online, including placing importance on an open dialogue between staff and students around 4 key elements: honesty, trust, responsibility, and respect. But of course, I mentioned we're in lockdown 3. We had lockdown 2 with the start of the new academic year in 2021. And we know that this pandemic will affect us through into the coming academic year. So from Easter onwards, QA and providers began to turn their attention from emergency response to recovery, developing hybrid and blended learning approaches. Flexibility remained a priority as public health restrictions changed. We have seen universities in towns that regionally have moved in and out of lockdown. We recently published an evaluation of blended learning in the UK based on engagement with over 60 providers from England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. And I hope one of my colleagues can paste that in the chat box. There was a focus on admissions and transitions for 20 to 21, considering what digitized welcomes and inductions might look like, working closely with students' organisations. There was discussion between providers about what physical requirements would be needed on campus. There was a need to validate large numbers of online variants of programmes and modules originally designed for in-person delivery, which required streamlined approval processes and risk mitigation systems. Again, colleagues worked together to discuss programme development, which in ordinary times might be a sensitive area. In assessment, there was close engagement with the students and staff to inform new approaches. Student representatives were members of steering groups in many institutions. Some practical learning outcomes were difficult for providers to assess remotely. Providers needed to consider alternative assessments or work with the students to identify changes in their learning outcomes. With these issues and others, our sector has come together in a way that we haven't seen for some time, willing to share practice, which is really important. It's this positive sharing that I think has the most positive long-term benefit from the pandemic. Looking ahead, it's through these innovative approaches that we are able to consider what future arrangements might be. In the immediate term, online and blended approaches will remain imperfect. There are still concerns about the robustness of IT systems and the importance of culture and collective well-being for students, and for students and staff to need the social and interpersonal side of learning and teaching. And I think David said very eloquently earlier, the need for staff to skill in this area. We're also hearing concern about student recruitment for 21-22, and particularly whether applicants for professional roles will have been able to get some work experience they need under the current circumstances. And we worry about essay mills and their targeting of students. Academic integrity is a core part of learning, and it builds trust in the system and the sector. But there's also many, many opportunities. In the ways the pandemic has accelerated trends that were already apparent. Looking ahead, there are questions about micro-credentials and portability, short courses to help people get back into the workplace and the economy, the structure of the academic year, and what institutions should look like in the future. I was privileged to be a member of the group that produced the report on the screen with Jessica and Emerge Education on the future of digital assessment. It sets out some of the possibilities for development beyond COVID. For example, whether group assessments can include bots to provide complementary personality traits. Within the UK, we're seeing reform to the relationship between further and higher education across the UK. There is interest in bringing the two closer together to work locally on skills needs and lifelong learning as we help the economy recover from the impacts of the pandemic. In quality assurance, there is interesting dimension to consider in terms of sustainability. Remote working has meant that our reviews are greener and cheaper. We don't spend so much time on travel and accommodation and reduce our environmental impact. And that makes it cheaper and faster for institutions as well. In a series of conversations with higher education leaders, our chairman, Professor Simon Gaskell, the former principal of Queen Mary University in London, was of the view that the lasting effect of the pandemic would accelerate change in international activities. The restrictions and limitations of on travel and the growth of online approaches have brought forward increases in demand and adaptations in transnational education. That's important to us because we have 142 UK universities delivering to more than 650,000 students through TNE. But TNE needs a shared trust between international stakeholders, host country education ministries, regulators and agencies, prospective employers, and most importantly, of course, the students. And QA is about to launch a new method of evaluation of TNE in the near future. There's going to be many more developments to come. The message we have through all of this is that flexibility, collaboration are at the heart, whether it's the designing of assessments, planning response frameworks, or providing clear communication and support for students. The most effective practice has been delivered by working together. As we continue to navigate the impact of the pandemic, that spirit of collaboration across borders should help strengthen confidence in the integrity of degrees in the UK and elsewhere, and to protect the global reputation of higher education. Colleagues, I would like to thank you once again for taking the time to listen to me, and I must make an apology. I said to Dr. Ahmed earlier, we are in the middle of a storm here and the wind is horrendous, and I hope the noise of it wasn't too much. I hope that that's been helpful and that we can have a very good discussion and exchange of ideas, and I shall stop sharing my slides. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. I'm sorry, thank you so much, Douglas. Well informative, Mr. Douglas Blackstone, Director of QA. If I can summary the presentation, he spoke about how UK higher education responding to the COVID-19 pandemic require technical expertise among students and the staff to transit to online teaching and learning. Availability and reliability of online tools and support is mandatory. He mentioned the need for alternative assessment to meet the learning outcome, for example, synchronous versus synchronous assessment, and how to adjust assessment during the COVID-19 pandemic. Time zone difference between countries has to be addressed. Shown the assessment procedure adapted in the University of Exeter versus Heriot-Watt University. And also we send the link for everyone. Thank you so much for QA for the support. Thank you so much really for that. I think now we have, we can accept the question and answer as well from our panelists. Please write it. You can write it for Q&A if you don't mind. I will read it, and if I receive anything, I have a question for Professor David Smith. What are the biggest challenges in assessing learning outcome of student in a remote learning?
As I mentioned, in our particular scenario, about 20% of the students are online or remote. The learning platform that we use provides all of the tools that are necessary to ensure that test taking is being done properly. You can video them while they're taking the test. You can check them for plagiarism if they were to hop on the internet and take some information. So we haven't had any real challenges there. And again, as I mentioned, business schools, their objectives tend to be a little bit softer than, let's say, if it was a medical school. And again, I'm not an expert in medical schools, and Douglas may jump in, but the ability to assess whether or not someone can demonstrate a procedure on a body or to calculate a chemical makeup or transaction, those types of things are different in terms of assessment. We haven't found any, other than the fact that there has been pressure to, as Douglas mentioned, pressure to go to the essay mills for any type of writing outcome measures that are being looked at. Exams have not been a problem. Presentations have been logistically more difficult, but again, because it's live as opposed to a pure online format, we really haven't seen any problems there. So my early assessment is there's been very little in the soft schools, in the non-resource-based schools. And in the resource-based schools, it's the ability to confirm whether or not the criteria of assessment is being measured because they're physically not in front of you. I'm not trying to be evasive. There hasn't been the key, I think, is the learning platform. Again, we use Canvas. I can't say enough about Canvas in terms of the modules and resources that are available to link to, which make it relatively seamless, both for communication and for assessment.
Oh, thank you, David. There is a question to Douglas here. How can you make sure the student take exam electronically without cheating? This perhaps one of the most common question asked by teachers who are new to online education and even some with experience.
Sure, and knowing it's the, we for many years, haven't we, in higher education, have had to worry about people coming in and imitating someone else to sit an examination. It can happen, and knowing your students really helps. This is where I think, and I will come back to some of the other practical things as well. This is where some of the work we are doing is looking at remote proctoring, getting the right type of software that can assess using software such as Turnitin and there's many other products, but also academic staff understanding the writing style of their students. And one of the things we've been pushing for some time is moving towards what we've been calling, and many other colleagues in the States and Canada and others have been calling, authentic assessment. And you find ways of testing that a student actually understands the work they've submitted by vivas or conversations or tutorials, going back to some of the old ways, so that they can actually demonstrate that they've written it. Some of these systems that people are using can track the student facial recognition, but this is all new and evolving technology. So we need to have a blended package of assessment that looks, I think, across a number of inputs from the students that allows you to tell that it's consistently them. I mean, the one thing is, we used to have a slogan that we should beat the cheat. The fact is, I don't think we'll ever beat the cheating completely. We just need to get better at deterring it and detecting it and educating students why it's wrong. Now, the other thing that there's some questions I typed. I didn't realize when I typed an answer in online and put a link in that then moved out of the live questions. This practical experience issue is huge in professions such as the built environment and health professions. And last week we have and colleagues on the call are the real down in the weeds experts on this in QAA. Last week we held a meeting between our Minister for Education and professional bodies such as the General Medical Council, the General Dental Council, the General Optical Council, the Nursing and Midwifery Council, Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, etc., etc. And I think the Law Society, I think David's right. In the softer ones, it's really about how do you know the remote assessment is the student who's sitting. But if you've got a program where you need 60 hours of practice in a clinical environment, how are we going to get that at the moment? Now, in some professions, the challenge has been bigger. In nursing, the students have been pulled out of the universities and they're in the front line in the hospitals. And so actually, how are they getting the chance to do their theoretical and their academic learning? And then in others like dentistry, how do you do dentistry in a COVID-safe environment? How do you create a COVID-safe environment when you hear from someone's face? And so some of we published earlier this week some guidance on practical and practice-based experience that students need. Some institutions have pushed those elements further back in the program with the hope that the pandemic, we emerge out of the pandemic. Some are looking at how can you assess the academic elements, then the students come back later to finish the practical elements. Some are looking at extending the academic year for a month or two to pick these things up. And what we're saying is there isn't a single way to do it. You have to find that, navigate institution by institution, chart your way through to a point where the student can achieve the learning outcomes and the practical experience that allows them to go into the profession. Now, the one qualifier I would say in that, because it's very easy to say this is all simple. It is not. It's the most devilish problem. The General Optical Council reported to us that there's been a 50% drop in progression into official registration this year because students haven't been able to complete all the activities. That then has a problem in the health service because we don't have enough trained people. Sure. And so we're going to have to find a way through this to catch up. And what we're doing, I'll say, is that we're working on solutions and we'll publish whenever we have ideas, and keep an eye on the QA website. Sorry, that was a very long answer, Dr. Ahmed.
No, this is very important. Honestly, this is really important. There is a question for Professor Smith. What could we prepare the student to face the new methods of assessment, which is more technologically driven during remote online teaching moods?
To be honest, our students tend to be more technologically savvy than many of the faculty. It's actually working backwards. But we have, again, had in place for at least 7 years our online platform in terms of measures of performance. To go back to the earlier question just for a minute, to take an exam for my student, we lock down their browser. They have to show ID. Their face is on camera the entire time. If their eyes move in any direction away from the screen, I get notified. There's a flag that goes up. The student is notified. So I am watching them the entire time that they take their exam. So there are tools that have been out there for years that can do that. In terms of technology related to, again, business type of delivery, the technology is relatively minor in terms of our specific learning outcomes. Presentations, you're talking about presentation technology, which again is relatively mature. Essay writing, communication skills, exam testing, long-term projects, the availability of library resources, those have all been there. So we don't have a high technology demand. Where I do see this from colleagues, as we talked about, is the healthcare professions. How do you come up with structures where you can watch a surgery occurring instead of being in the classroom when there's some type of, let's say, dissection going on, as opposed to being remote? How do you interact and do that type of work? That technology is much more advanced. The Canadians are doing a good job because they've been in remote environments for a while. So the northern communities of Canada have had to connect with the southern universities. So there are some platforms out there. But as far as getting the students savvy for technology, I'm not sure that I haven't seen a huge need for that. They've demonstrated their ability to use their laptops, jump in multiple online delivery methods, and I think their speed to pick up the technology transfer is much faster than the middle-aged older faculty member like myself who is kind of playing catch up. And then lastly, we have an outstanding technology department. Resources have to be given to the technology department, which handles online learning and all of the structures, so that when students have questions, they can immediately contact someone and get a live individual to solve that problem real time, because students are learning real time as opposed to getting an answer 3 or 4 days later. So again, that's the policy that's being driven from above, and I think it supports an easy transition to a more online digital learning platform.
Thank you, Prof. There is a different question here. I would like to read one of them. They're asking about, can we call the learning assessment as online learning assessment under the current circumstances prevailing? How you see it, Douglas?
Sure. I mean, I think I'm very much in favour of, in if we ever have normal circumstances, having blended approaches. I think the idea of doing everything as we used to do is really not how higher education has evolved. I think the opportunity that this has provided to have a blend of physical in the room, take material away, write and submit by an online, by email or whatever, and then doing an element of online assessment. Many people do these various tests online. I think it's fine to call the aspects of each part of the assessment what it is. One of the things that struck me when David was saying there, I mentioned the group I was on that developed this we looked forward to 2030. What's the future of digital assessment? And one of the colleagues there was from Brunel University, and she's very advanced. She's really, if you were looking for someone on this, she's really good and hot on it. But even in an advanced university like that, they had resistance from academic staff to teach online, to do assessments online. One of the issues that arose is, of course, many of them were in the vulnerable age groups for COVID, and suddenly teaching online and learning and assessment online for them was beneficial in terms of the health protection. And as they've engaged in this, they found it better. I will use an example. This is very personal, so I should be cautious. But we have 4 sons, and 3 of them are currently students, and all 4 have partners who are students. And I've been observing something that I'd heard about before, and I've been checking, many people are telling it. Because lectures are now available to download when you want, my kids are telling me, my sons are telling me, that they watch the lecture and then they go back to it and they watch it at 1.5 or 1.75 speed to get to the points that are really important, and it's reinforcing the learning. And one of my sons is using Saturday is the day he watches all his lectures and takes all his notes and goes through it. Sunday he's set aside then for writing up. Monday it's for preparing his next. And actually, during lockdown, they've not had all the other distractions. And indeed, St Andrews University have reported me, they think students have increased their level of achievement because they didn't have all the social distractions. So I think as we come out of this pandemic, I don't see things, and certainly in the UK, the mood is, colleagues are saying, we won't go back to how it was, but we want to use the good parts of this and make it better and give students choice. So one of our board members is the Vice Chancellor of Wrexham Glendower University, and they are now seriously addressing their delivery in the way that students can personalise their learning, to pick and choose the ways that suits them to learn and give them flexibility and options.
Thank you so much. There is a question from Professor Amjad Gandil. Douglas, I'm sorry, David, if you can help me to answer it. Asking, what is the benefits of keep doing high-stake assessing using technology? Is the investment in digital invigilation worth? What lessons are we learning from COVID-19? Big question.
Yeah, it is a big question. Maybe I'll work backwards. As Douglas has pointed out in numerous examples, and I've said as well, we're actually learning new ways to be efficient. We're learning new ways to increase capacity. We're learning new ways to meet specific customer needs as opposed to generic big aggregate customer needs. I don't think there's a requirement, and this goes back to my mission statement. What does the university want to be? For a smaller university like ourselves, we can't compete against a large state university. We don't have the resources. And if a large university wants to go online, the competitive nature of our landscape changes dramatically if we're going to go online with them. We are geographically situated for a specific demographic, and if we try to be all things to all students, we're going to fail. So the focus for our activity has been to get the student back on campus. That might be a bit archaic, but at the same time, the dynamic of the environment outside of the classroom, we believe adds as much value to the learning experience as the one inside the classroom. So with that, our trustees are saying, we don't want to give so much that it becomes so easy that we lose all our students. And future students would say, well, why will I go to that university? I can go to a much higher esteemed university and take their program online and potentially be better off. Because our particular mission talks about transforming students' lives, not just giving them a vocation or an education or a certification. We want to change who they are as individuals and have them, move on into their professional and adult life being, driven by what they learned at our university. You cannot do that online. It's impossible. However, you can put more students in a room if you have 3/4 online or on ground and 1/4 online. So I don't think we're saying here today that technology for technology's sake is the answer. We're saying that there are problems that need to be fixed, and because of COVID and other issues, some of those can be fixed by technology in terms of the tools that have been laid out, the best practices that have been laid out, while others cannot. So I think her question was, do we just need to jump into technology? No. And I think that needs to be driven by your organization. And I don't think we want all online organizations. And again, just to be clear, I am saying online as being the traditional online asynchronous mode. We are using more of a synchronous hybrid or high flex where you're getting a little bit of both. So there are really 3 modes that you're seeing kind of moving forward: your traditional, your hybrid, and your fully online. So I hope that kind of sums it. It was a big question, but I hope that goes to the meat of the question.
Thank you so much, Prof. Smith. There is another question from Professor Raed Al-Akil. He asking, what technology tools could be most helpful for online faculty members looking for a different approach to assessment? Douglas, can you have a tips for that?
I would have to confess, Dr. Ahmed, I wouldn't know enough to recommend particular software, but I think there has been a subsequent report by GISC, our sector's IT service in the UK, on various options. I don't know if colleagues on it'd be interesting if any colleagues on the call in the chat could mention platforms they've been using. We'd like to understand what's available and how to use them, but I personally have not got the insights enough into, I think David mentioned Canvas earlier. I know many people use Blackboard and all, but the detail of the services is not my area of expertise. It would be dangerous of me to recommend something. Can I just pick up on the last point David was making? I know what I'm hearing from students is that the student surveys are showing a lot of satisfaction, not perfect with the learning part. It's the social part they're missing, the building of networks and friendships and all of those sort of things that you don't get by a wholly online experience.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I had stopped.
Okay. Well, if you allow me, Professor David Smith, there is a question which has struck me really from my colleague from Jazan University. She mentioned, do you think that our main responsibility as a faculty staffs to pave the road for the student, to show them the information accessibility? Do you think the situation gives us this opportunity to change the education policy globally? What do you think, David?
Yes, we had this question come up from our faculty. What is our role? I mean, you always have the customer role, and there's a question as to whether or not a student is a customer. Many believe they are, many believe they aren't. Okay, you're training someone for society, so you're training them for stakeholder benefit, not necessarily themselves. Okay, we could just give all A's and be on our way if it were about that. That's not what it is. Our role, I think, at the faculty level is to ensure that you are delivering the material that is to be assessed, to assess that material, and then to evaluate the student on that material. Whether or not you are doing that in a forceful way or a gentle way is kind of the personality of the faculty member. Certain universities who are tuition driven take more of a customer-centric view, and they want you to be overly customer focused. There are other universities that have more than enough students that say, look, these are the requirements, you need to meet them, and I will evaluate whether or not you have met them. We tend to be in the first one. So we are more customer centric. So we do give the students a lot more leeway and opportunities in terms of how when they take an exam, how they take an exam, make up exams, extra time on assignments, extra time when they're in different time zones. We are instructed by the organization and policy to accommodate within reason. So as professors, we accommodate within reason, but I have colleagues at other universities where they have not changed their viewpoint and that they're very strict. So my thinking is that we don't necessarily pave the way to an easy completion of a task or an assessment item. You still want it to be rigorous. You still want it to be measurable, but at the same time, you have to give, I'll use the word grace or some type of leeway or this area of flexibility to allow them to succeed. We don't want time or rigidity to be the only reason why they're not going to succeed on a particular course outcome. So I get that would be more of an opinion in my part. Thank you.
Thank you. There is a question, Mr. Douglas. What are the most pressing concerns you hear from faculty members regarding online assessment during COVID-19?
Well, I think we've covered some of them. I mean, if I can put it in the broader concerns, I've just pasted in reports of a survey of around 2,700 teaching staff on their experiences in the recent period. I think the things that are bothering academic staff in general are overload. And that leads into the assessment challenges. I spoke to a colleague from one nursing program when students were back on campus, because of social distancing rules, she had to deliver the same lecture 7 times in a week and the same seminar 7 times in a week. And so actually the space and the time that colleagues have got available, they're having to devote a large amount of time for mentoring and support for students, which they don't feel bad about, but it's difficult because the time. They are worried about their own health and the welfare of their families. And on top of this, they've got to design online assessments that are rigorous, that meet often professional standards, meet external accreditation standards, and will be seen to be robust and trusted qualifications. Academic staff are telling me they are very worried about the so-called COVID generation, that their qualifications may not be valued because it's been seen to be too easy. But they're also worried about the disadvantage that will students have a fair opportunity to sit these assessments and then final one is the one we've all touched on a couple of times. How do they make sure that it is student setting it, cheating? I don't think everyone thinks that there is a problem with a potential problem and some problem with emails and cheating. The vast majority of students will be honest, but academic members of staff are worried that they have not got the tools and the experience to detect that yet. This is why I think one of the other big long-term implications of this, that goes right back to Professor Smith's initial contribution, the skilling, the training, the development, the tooling up of the academic staff to be able to adjust, I think, is the thing. Some are much more confident than others. Some are very worried about it.
Dr. Ahmed, may I just one thing?
Yeah.
As a professor, and Douglas is right on the money, our accrediting body also requires us to do research. So our loads have all increased in terms of assessment and delivery. And what's happened is this has affected research for my colleagues. They have a production that they have to meet, which is driven by the accrediting body. So there's going to have to be some, I guess, negotiation, if we want to call that, between the accrediting body and the university in terms of what's realistic during this time frame. Because if the accrediting body, such as AACSB, says, no, you said there's going to be 3 publications in 5 years, and we don't care that you had to do 7 extra lectures per week. So you'll see, this is not immediate today, but you're going to see this come up probably in a year or 2 from now, where you're going to see this pressure to negotiate with accrediting bodies on what was the traditional performance of the faculty members. So there is a lot of pressure, without a doubt.
Indeed. Well, we have only 4 minutes left. I think we are now in a segment for final thoughts. We have 2 minutes for Mr. Douglas, and 2 minutes for Professor David Smith. We can start with Mr. Douglas Blackstone for 2 minutes final thoughts. The floor is yours.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. Firstly, just to start my finishing points on something David said there, those of us who work in quality assurance and those of us who work in accreditation, we don't deliver or qualify a single student. That is done by academic staff, by universities. And we have to understand our place in the world, which is important. We provide public confidence. We create trust in the system. But we have to understand there's a global pandemic and people have had to make adjustments. I think in our initial experience dealing with the professional accreditors in the UK and with some colleagues in quality assurance in other countries, people thought the pandemic would be over by the summer. Then they thought it would be over by the new year. We know it's going to be a long time for safety, for security, for public health, for travel, that this is going to have an impact of 2, 3, 5 years perhaps. So I would plead to anyone who works in my field is you should be starting conversations should be, how did you adjust? What did you adjust? Was it reasonable? Have you made good decisions about the qualifications of your students? And the final thing I would say is that this is the beginnings of a journey of this higher education community learning from each other within our own countries and internationally. We are making changes. Some of them may not work. Some of them will be enlightening and fantastic. There's no one organization, no one individual, no one institution has all the answers. Higher education is at its best when we work together. That's what it's all about. That's what we do. That's where we're really good. And it's been an enormous privilege to speak to colleagues in Saudi Arabia and beyond today. I just wish that we could be in that room where we could all talk to each other and have a coffee and catch up and have a little chat. Maybe next year.
Soon, I hope. Professor David Smith, your final thoughts, please.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. This has been very encouraging, and these types of events, these, again, Zoom events, if you want to call them, these webinars are extremely important to the sharing of information. As Douglas said, that has to continue, not only at the macro level between universities, but within universities. Upper level administration needs to be responsive to the needs of the faculty and at the program level. They need to provide resources. And at this particular time, those resources are digital resources, platforms to communicate with students, platforms to deliver exams, platforms to measure performance on writing assignments, the ability to have classrooms that are equipped and ready to go, that you don't come into and you take 20 minutes to get started before you can even figure out how to turn the camera on, things like that. And if they are responsive, I think higher education and understanding their role will fall into place. Faculty members love teaching. Faculty members love teaching. They love students. They want to create an environment of learning. And it's as frustrating for the faculty member as it is for the student when that doesn't go smoothly. So my hope is that the discussion and conversation continues both within the university, and that the university is responsive to the faculty and they have the resources to provide, and that the university engages in overall macro level conversations with fellow universities, peer universities, international universities. So Dr. Ahmed, I think you're right on target with these types of initiatives, and I hope you keep them going. And maybe you can invite me, as I'll be a participant and listen next time, so maybe I can learn. And Douglas, thank you. I did pick up some nuggets there, which were very valuable for me that I jotted down. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Professor David.
Uh-oh, I think we lost them.
Yeah, we have. I think we've lost Dr. Ahmed. David, one of my colleagues may drop you a note about maybe if you could maybe write a blog for us from a US perspective. But
well,
are you still there, Dr. Ahmed?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, we are there. Back. We just got
going in and out. That would be fine. Yeah, just have them shoot that to me. I'd be happy to look at it. If I have the time, Douglas, or something.
Yeah, we all need time.
Well, Mr. Douglas Blackstone, Professor David Smith, thank you so much. On behalf of the President of the University, Professor Abdullah Rubaysh, on behalf of thousands of students and thousands of faculty we have here in Imam Abdurrahman bin Faisal, and also on behalf of hundreds of people attended today globally, from America, from India, from South Africa, from UK, from Saudi Arabia, different location in Saudi. We really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it myself. I learned a lot. Thank you so much for both of you and for participation. Thank you for our audience. 90 minutes, we are together. We're enjoying the webinar, and hopefully we'll see you in other webinar. Our next webinar, just to remind you, will be in February 15, 2021. Thank you so much all.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Ahmed.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Do you want us to stay on for a second, or are you?
No, regard the question and answer. If there is a chance, we can answer the remaining. We have a lot of questions. I really appreciate if we answer the people that will be helpful for communication. Thank you so much all. And I think that we'll be off the line in a minute.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. Hope to see you in person in the near future.
Sure. Yes. Well. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care of yourself. Thank you. Bye-bye.